I never believed the mountains could swallow people whole. At least not until I saw it happen with my own eyes, or whatever those eyes of mine have turned into since that night. The first time I heard about the disappearances was through a podcast. A late-night show about unsolved vanishings in remote regions of the United States. I was half asleep when I caught the host's words. The Black Ridge Range has claimed 11 hikers since 1984. No bodies. No clues. Only silence. Something about his tone cut through the static. I didn't switch off the radio. I just listened in the dark until dawn. I'm not an investigator or journalist. I lead mountain rescue operations in Colorado, and I've seen enough body recoveries to know that nature doesn't always return what it takes. But every now and then, she hides more than she devours. That's what drew me to Black Ridge. The official reports said all searches failed. Locals stopped hiking there years ago. The missing weren't found, nor the gear, nor even traces of camps. Just vanished, as if the air itself erases memory. 3 weeks ago, my partner Lai got a message from a woman named Amanda. Her brother was among the missing. She claimed she had seen him in a recent photo posted by a tourist. A timestamp was from this August. The man looked alive. Same scar on the neck, same jacket she'd sewn for him 10 years prior. The location tag, somewhere deep in the Black Ridge Range. That's when I agreed to go. We drove for hours through fog, the road curling like an exhausted snake around bare cliffs. Cell towers died behind us. The ranger station hadn't been staffed in 2 years. A dead radio on the desk. A half-written log entry dated October 2023. Strange noise again, like breathing beneath the snow. Lee tried to joke about it, but by sunset even her laughter sounded thin. The air here felt different. It hummed, low and steady, as if the mountains weren't stone at all, but something alive and waiting. That night, the wind carried voices. I swear I heard them. Some in English, some in sounds not human. Dreams came heavy and cold. I saw shapes walking along the ridgeline, their outlines flickering like flames caught in a storm. When I woke, there were footprints outside our tent, barefoot, deep enough to belong to someone heavier than a man. In the morning, the compass spun without end. Lee thought it was magnetism. There are mineral anomalies all through the Rockies. Sure, but my gut said otherwise. I checked our GPS. Blank screen. Flat battery, though it had been charged hours earlier. The sun barely rose, colors bleeding gray across the peaks. Faint whispers drifted on the wind again, fading just beyond hearing. We pushed deeper toward the coordinates from Amanda's message. A path carved into the granite seemed almost deliberate, but maps marked nothing there. Trees thinned. The snow underfoot grew darker gray, not white, laced with fine black dust that smeared like ash. Then came the first sign of the missing. A torn sleeve caught on a branch. Military fabric, weathered but intact. Inside it, a small tag. W.R. That was the name from one of the earliest vanishings, William Ross. 1986. The material couldn't have survived 60 winters out here. Yet it did. Lee went silent for a long minute. Her eyes darted to the cliffs above us where mist hung thick, almost opaque, streaming downward like something descending rather than rising. We camped again near a frozen lake that wasn't on any map. Its surface shimmered with faint reflections, not of us, but of movement underneath. Slow, deliberate. Shapes crawling beneath the ice in complete silence. I thought it was my mind playing tricks under altitude stress, until one shape lifted a hand-like form and pressed it from beneath the surface, leaving behind an imprint that didn't fade for hours. We moved miles away before setting up the next camp, but by nightfall, I knew it followed. Not a hunch. Not the hunter's intuition mountain people brag about at bars. It was the way silence seemed to lag a half step behind our footsteps, as if something was learning to copy our rhythm and kept improving hour by hour. By noon, it matched Lee's shorter stride. By dusk, it matched my limp from an old rope bridge fall I hadn't felt in years. We cut our headlamps early to save batteries and walked by slate-blue twilight. The sky above the ridge looked wrong like a tarp pulled too tight across crooked beams. A low thrumming rose from somewhere under the earth, pulsed through my boots and steadied my breath to its beat. My body wanted to inhale when it told me, exhale when it gave permission. When I fought it, my chest burned, a stubborn ache under the sternum, like thin ice flexing. Lee touched my sleeve. "Do you hear that?" "Which that?" I asked, already knowing we meant different things. I heard the buried rhythm and the faraway voices again, stretched thin like magnetic tape. She heard a separate strand quick, dry clicks that traveled in arcs, as if circling us at tree height. We stopped. The clicks stopped. We moved. The clicks moved. Echo. I lied. "Trees don't echo like that," she said, and I couldn't see her face, but I heard the smile she puts on when she's afraid and refuses to feed it. We found a shelf below a leaning outcrop to bivy. Rock overhead, wind-screened, no clear approach from behind. Textbook choice. Still, the cold had a taste, metallic and faintly sweet, like a coin on the tongue. I brewed something hot and bitter. Steam rose in ribbons and then drifted sideways, then upward, then back into the pot, as if the air were a loop of invisible glass. I pulled my hand through it. The steam clung to my wrist hair and didn't let go until I shook it free, annoyed like you shoo a fly. "Lights," Lee whispered. Across the frozen tarn we'd skirted, 3 pale beams drifted among standing pines, too steady for headlamps, too even for fire. They moved with a drowning person's patience, low, searching circles that never touched ground. Lee reached for the flare gun and then changed her mind. She's smarter than the part of me that wanted to announce we existed. Something shuffled just beyond the outcrop, not quite footsteps, not quite animal, like a wet rope being pulled over bark. Then a smell, old snow packed with rot, thawed and refrozen so many times it forgot which it preferred. The clicks resumed, faster now, creating the illusion of small shapes orbiting us, tapping the trunks like a finger counting down. "Stay awake," I said. "In shifts." "Shifts," she agreed, and we didn't sleep at all. At some point, the tapping began answering itself from different angles. I raised the thermos to sip and saw, reflected in the dull metal, not my own face, but something like mine, shifted half a beat out of time. It lifted the thermos a moment after I did. Its eyes lagged, like they were sending signal through distance. I lowered the bottle, and the reflection did not. It stared at me 1 heartbeat longer, then caught up, a minor error corrected. I set the thermos down with a steadiness I didn't feel. We break at dawn. Dawn came like a bruise. Not brightening, but discoloring. The snow was grayer than before, the sky yellower, as if the world had been washed in a basin where something else had been cleaned, and the water wasn't changed. The tarn ice was not smooth now, but corrugated, long shallow ridges like fingerprints pressed too hard. Underneath, movement resumed coiling, uncoiling, as if the lake's undersurface were alone. We hiked. The path, if that path ever existed, braided and unbraided itself between boulders that felt rearranged. I marked an X on a trunk with a knife fresh, bright, obvious. 20 minutes later, we passed the same trunk with the same X, except the sap had filmed over, tacky as though an hour had passed. I put my palm to it and felt it pulse in that same underground tempo, faint but unignorable. I took my hand away, and my skin retained an imprint not of bark, but of smooth, curved ridges, as if I had pressed into the tarn. Lee tried the radio again. White hiss, then a voice, distant and without origin. Turn back, turn back. Not a ranger freck, not a known band. The syllables stretched unevenly, like someone practicing speech by pulling sounds through wire mesh. The hiss swallowed the rest. Lee clicked it off and on. The voice returned with the same fragment, but altered the second word. Turn black. She shut it down and looked at me. I pretended to adjust my back. We crossed into a stand of bristlecones so old, their dead looked younger than the living. The wind snagged in their twisted wood and spoke vowels, not words shapes of words. I found another sign of the missing, a loop of paracord tied around a trunk at shoulder height, the nelt line around the knot new and clean. The cord was warm to the touch. When I loosened it, my gloves left depressions in the frost like fingerprints, and the depressions did not bounce back. Someone's near, I said. Or near is moving, Lee answered. By midday, the sky thinned to sickle silver. Shadows shortened to nubs, and then elongated sideways without consulting the sun. Mine leaned toward the ravine and kept walking when I stopped an optical trick, surely until it remembered me, and snapped back, a rubber band finding its peg. Lee's shadow lagged 2 steps behind her and flickered like a bad projector. She didn't mention it. I didn't either. Sometimes ignoring a thing is the only way to keep it from learning you've seen it. We took a ridge that should have led to an old fire road. Instead, the ridge led to a cairn I swear we had not built. 9 stones balanced on a goat skull's brow. No tracks, no disturbance. But in the hollow of the skull was a Polaroid sealed in cracked plastic. A man in a red parka stood next to a twisted pine, smiling with a mouth too wide, like the lens had curved him. Behind him stood a woman with her face turned away. On the back, August 14th. See? Told you the air tastes sweet. The ink had not bled. The edge left a clean line on my thumb. Is that? Lee began. Not your brother, I said too quickly. It wasn't, but the parka had a patch W.R. stitched with the careful hand of someone who mends what she loves. The same initials from the sleeve. Time refused to stack the way it should out here. We moved on. The ridge narrowed. A snowfall drifted out of an empty sky, just a thin curtain, then stopped at the ravine's edge as if held at a border checkpoint. The flakes hovered, trembling, then reversed and slid back into the cloud that had made them. I reached out. One flake touched my glove and slipped upward, cool against the leather, then pressed into the seam until my glove drank it like water. The clicks changed. They were closer now, right at ear level, intimate as sleep talk. Sometimes they resolved into syllables, not English, but shaped like it had taught itself on a broken textbook. My name tried itself once, mispronounced, then again, better. Evan. It sounded like my mother on the nights the fever ran too hot, the syllable dipping in the middle. Lee stopped dead. Ahead, the trail pitched into a chute of blue ice. We'd need crampons. We hadn't planned ice this early, but the mountain didn't care what we planned. While we strapped in, I felt that gaze again, not eyes, but attention settling on the seam between my shoulder blades. I turned slow. Across the chute, on a shoulder of rock, stood 3 figures. At least, they stood like people stand when they've forgotten to pretend they're people. Their heads were a little too angled. Their arms hung a little too parallel. They faced us without facing us, the way a weather vane faces wind. "Hey!" Lee shouted, the urge to be saved older than caution. Her voice broke on the final syllable. The figures did not respond. Their outlines flickered thin, as if stitched to the air with thread too fine to hold. Then 2 of them turned and slid behind the rocks with a greasy smoothness. The third remained, and in the wobble of its edges, I recognized that tourist photo posture, that fake candid stance we adopt when told to look natural. It raised an arm in a wave, but the hand lagged, a duplicate wave rising a half-second later, as if 2 recordings were playing at once and trying to sync. "Don't," I said to nothing in particular. Lee had already unclipped. She started across the chute, cautious, picking the old boot holes someone had chopped long ago. The figure tipped slightly, inquisitive. I stepped after her, not to catch up, but to be close enough to drag her back if the ice went out. Midway, the blue beneath us darkened like breath-fogging glass. Within the ice, a shape swam, the suggestion of a shoulder, a hip, a knee bending. It turned in slow motion and pressed outward. The surface did not crack. It bulged. I heard tendons in my forearms creak with the urge to get off that skin. "Lee," I said, gentle the way you speak to a skittish dog. "Back." She looked down, finally seeing what I saw. Her pupils widened until the iris was just a token rim. She nodded, small, a movement meant not to disturb the air. We backed together, toe-heel, as the bulge followed us like a cat follows the red dot. At the edge, safe on rock that only pretended to be trustworthy, the figure across the way tilted its head, bird-like. Then, not with its mouth, but with the air around where a mouth should be, it made the sound of my voice saying, "We should have brought more rope." The tone was perfect. The cadence was mine. Even the private impatience at the end. Hearing your own voice outside your body does something primitive to your spine. Mine tried to walk away on its own. Lee's hand found my sleeve again, and now she didn't hide how hard she was shaking. "It knows us," she said. "Or it makes like it knows us. It wants us to believe it does," I said, and the line sounded brave enough to keep us from breaking on the spot. We retreated along the ridge, then dropped into timber, needles muffling our noise. The light went thin and jaundiced. Smells changed. The metallic sweetness deepened into something like wet copper and crushed dandelions. My tongue numbed at the edges as if anesthetic were entering my mouth through the air. We made a blind camp under a blowdown, a low tent of branches. No fire, no stove. We chewed cold calories like punishment and listened. The clicks moved away, then closer. Then they were beneath us, under the soil. I could feel them through my ribs where they touched the ground. When I closed my eyes, I saw a map of the range not as ridges and draws, but as a slow cycling machine, each peak a gear tooth, each valley a belt, everything running on a power source we didn't have a word for. I must have slept, or I fell into a place besides sleep. In that place, I walked into our ranger station from 3 days before, only it was older, warmer with use. Coffee rings on a logbook fanned open to a page I hadn't seen. In neat block letters, October 2023, strange noise again, like breathing beneath the snow. Below it, a second line appeared as I watched, ink foaming itself with patient deliberation. November 2025. Don't tap back. The pen, unseen, lifted, dotted the last letter as carefully as a schoolchild. When I woke, my finger was tapping the ground in a slow reply to the subterranean clicks. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. The rhythm matched the one my father used on my bedroom wall after night shifts to say he was home safe. I pulled my hand away and sat on it. Lee's eyes were open, glittering with that fever brightness. "You hear it too," she said, not a question. "It's trying to teach us its knock," I said, "or learn ours." "Don't teach it," she said. "Please don't." The dark between branches broke, not with dawn, with something clearer than light, like a lens dropped over a camera. For a breath, the forest snapped into a focus so acute it hurt, the grain in each needle, the old insect galleries braided under bark, the gossamer strand between two twigs drawn like wire. In that focus, I saw them, dozens, standing where trees were not, occupying the shape of absence. Thin, human high, arranged at the angles of our blind like teeth around a wound. They did not move. They did not need to. The world adjusted around their decision to be there. I closed my eyes, opened them. The focus softened, merciful and cruel at once. The shapes were gone. The impression stayed, the way a bright bulb leaves ghosts on your vision. We're not lost, I said, lying, praying the mountain favored brave lies. We're observed. Observed is worse, Lee whispered. Lost doesn't look back. We packed in ritual silence. Routine is a life raft. Buckle, cinch, check. Count the things that can be counted. 3 liters water, 4 flares, 1 extra layer each, 2 head layer, each 2 headlamps, 1 useless GPS, 1 compass that spins like a children's toy. Names keep you human. I spoke them under breath. Carabiner, runner, belay, descender. The mouth remembers how to be a person if you give it the right shapes. We stepped out, and something stepped with us, perfectly hidden, perfectly present, like a word on the tip of the tongue. We aimed downhill, not because the map told us to, but because gravity is a kind of faith. The forest thinned to a floodplain of pale stones. Between them ran water, but when I knelt and cupped it, the water gathered in my hands and didn't fall through my fingers until I told it to. I told it to. It obeyed like a reluctant child. Across the stones, a line of stakes had been driven into the ground long ago, their tops painted with a red that hadn't faded. Strung between them, a cable hung slack, and from that cable dangled tags cut from aluminum cans. They chimed when the breeze touched them and stayed silent when the wind shoved. On one, someone had scratched letters with a nail. If you hear yourself, run. On another, if you see yourself, kneel. On a third, if you feel yourself, hold still. Lee swallowed. What does that even? The ground answered for her. A thrum rose through the stones, up into my bones, into my teeth. My jaw vibrated until the world stuttered frame by frame. The tags went quiet all at once, then swung toward us as if magnetized by breath. On the far bank, standing ankle-deep where the water refused to wet them, the 3 figures waited. Behind them, the forest had a crease in it like a page dog eared by a giant hand. The middle figure stepped forward. It tried my name again. Evan. Closer now, almost right. Then, with my father's night shift knock. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. Everything in me leaned. Every old hunger. Every loss I had learned to carry. The part of me that loved being called home answered by starting to raise my hand. Lee pressed my knuckles down so hard my bones clicked. Don't, she said. Not to me. Not to it. To the thin, invisible membrane that still separated us from whatever waited with such infinite patience up here. Not yet. The figure tilted its head, listening to a radio I couldn't hear. That it smiled with the wrong muscles. And the crease in the forest behind it deepened, just enough to show me a color I had never seen and immediately recognized as old. That was when I realized we had not come to find the missing. We had come to join what was doing the finding. If I'm honest, the thought that saved us wasn't noble. It was petty and human. I didn't want whatever wore my father's knock to have my name as a trophy. That small refusal held like a piton hammered into bad rock. We edged along the floodplain, keeping the cable of jangling tags between us and the figures. The middle one never stepped off the water. It pivoted the way a camera on a gimbal pivots, frictionless, too smooth, no weight shift. When stones skittered from under Lee's boots, the tags should have chimed. Instead they held their breath, and the silence around their dull edges felt deliberate, as if sound itself waited to see what we would choose. Choice is a kind of weather up here. Northwest, I said, pointing at a break in the trees with a slope flattened into a bench. The bench would give us a line of sight. Lines of sight feel like control. That lie can get you through. We climbed. Snow thinned to crust. Lichen took over the granite in maps of continents no one had seen. The clicks faded behind us and then arrived ahead, the same pattern traveling faster than feet. On the bench, a stand of stunted firs formed a rough ring. In the center, a cairn symbol, unadorned this time. On top of the cairn, a metal lunchbox rested, enamel chipped, white with blue stars. I knew it before I picked it up. My mother packed that pattern for my third-grade field trips. The latch was bent in the exact way mine bent when I tried to open it with cold fingers on a bus to Mesa Verde. I didn't open it. Lee watched me not open it. She didn't ask. She knew enough about traps to recognize one that uses memory instead of bait. We skirted the ring. The air inside the circle was warmer by a degree you could taste. My breath fell out of step with the under-earth thrum, and for a second my chest felt like mine again. I almost stepped in just for the relief. Almost. On the far side, someone had carved words into the tough hide of a fur. The grooves had not bled sap. Do not answer questions you did not ask. On another trunk, lower, nearly covered in beard moss. Do not agree with yourself? There were more, half buried in lichen. This place collected rules the way glaciers collect stones. The bench tilted, slid us into a shallow saddle where the wind herded mist like sheep. Inside the mist, distances lied. Close sounded far. Far sounded intimate. A raven croaked down in the drainage, and the note came from inside my hood. The smell of warming rock rose, summer strong, though the sun stayed a dull coin. I could feel my pulse in my gums. Lee tugged my sleeve, chin tilting toward a smudge below. A shack, if you were generous. A ranger cache, if you were optimistic. It slouched against a boulder like it was listening. The roof had lost shingles to storms that had not come yet. The door was closed with a loop of chain and a tent stake. On the door, someone had painted a square in black tar. The tar wasn't fully set. The brush marks glistened, and the square swallowed light so completely it looked like a hole cut into something brighter. We're not going in there, I said. We're absolutely going in there, Lee said, which is how partnerships work. You take turns pretending you're the sensible one. We moved slow. The black square absorbed our shadows. Up close, the door's wood showed faint ripples, as if it had swelled and dried over centuries in a single day. The chain hung slack in a way that suggested it had been lifted and replaced recently by hands that knew this ritual. I slipped the stake free. The door sighed open like a bandage. Inside, the dark didn't behave. The room had the proportions of a maintenance shed, but my eyes couldn't find corners. A workbench stood against a wall that didn't quite commit to being there. On the bench, a topographic map of the range, hand annotated with pencil lines that wandered off the paper and into air, continuing on nothing for several centimeters, before admitting they had no surface and drooping like tired wires. A logbook lay open. The ink on the last entry was wet. NOV 1. If you must knock, knock between. Not on, not under, between. Below, in a shaky hand that leaned forward like it was trying to leave the page, NOV 2. They have learned the jokes. The page smelled faintly of bleach and pennies. My fingertips itched. I turned another page, careful not to smear. A Polaroid slid free, face down, catching an edge of my nail. I shouldn't have. I did. I flipped it. Lee and I stared at ourselves from the doorway of this same shack. We were a little out of focus. The black square on the door behind us looked deeper, like we were backlit by absence. On the white border, someone had written with a fine marker, "Don't hold the pose too long." Lee exhaled through her nose, a near laugh that failed to be one. "Okay," she said, voice kept low by force. "That's funny. That's actually funny. Is it?" I asked, because the angle of our heads in the picture was wrong by a degree, just enough to suggest a photographer with a patience we didn't have. We searched for supplies, because searching is a way to not think. Cans with labels turned blank as we read them. A flare box with damp matches inside. A coil of wire that kinked around my wrist, and then remembered it was wire. In a drawer, nested like a family, were 5 compasses that spun and 1 that did not. The still one ticked, very faintly, and its needle pointed not north, but toward the black square on the door. When I rotated it, the needle stuttered toward me, then to the floor, then to Lee, then to the space between us, hovering over nothing as if nothing were a location. Lee held out her palm. The needle steadied to a point exactly between the lines of her lifeline and heartline. "Between," she said. "Between," I agreed, and the word felt like the name of a town we had been driving toward without knowing. A sound arrived, the way steam arrives when a kettle decides you've waited enough. Not outside. Not inside. Between. A thin pressure built in my ears, then relieved itself in a pop that tasted like cold iron. The logbook pages fluttered. The Polaroid in my hand warmed, and the ghost of our faces darkened as if someone were shaking the chemistry. In the photo, my mouth began to open, pixels of silver gathering to form a word. I put it face down gently, like covering a sleeping child. The door moved. Not a slam, a decision. It swung halfway, then paused as if considering either courtesy or appetite. The black square drank what little light the shed had gathered. In the square, something lighter shifted a ripple within absence, a knot in the fabric of not there. A question came from it, and there is no other word, because it was structured exactly like a question. Rise, fall, curl at the end. But the content was shape and pressure, not language. It pushed up against my ribs and waited for the thing that answers to answer. Lee whispered, "Do not answer questions you did not ask." We held our breath. The question pressed harder, an ache behind the eyes, the temptation exquisite. All the ways to end not knowing delivered to your mouth like a spoon. I swallowed. The question sulked. If absence can sulk, then thinned until the room settled by an inch. The pressure left. The black square kept being black. The figures did not enter. They didn't need to. From the doorway, they reassembled their imitation of human attention, and the shack reassembled its imitation of protection. Safety here was a feedback loop, not a boundary. Night, such as it existed here, gathered in layers. We sat back to back under the window, our shoulders making a small, ordinary machine that hummed with shared heat. Lee's breathing sensed to mine, then the mountain's rhythm tried to sink us both to it. We let our breaths wander. Do not agree with yourself. After some time, the clicks returned faint, patient, tapping a sequence that wanted badly to be a conversation. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. It waited. The ink in the logbook glistened in time. The compass's needles swung like eel spines. The wire in the drawer coiled tighter, listening. "Someone in here taught it," Lee said. "Or it's always known," I said. "And we're the ones learning." The shack made a sound then, the way an old boat does when a swell lifts it. A long, tired creak that acknowledged forces larger than wood. The black square darkened further, if that's possible, like a pupil dilating. In the square, shapes rose the way bubbles rise from deep water. A handprint pressed from the other side, and there was nothing for it to press against, which meant it pressed against us. This is the part where a sensible narrator tells you he ran. We did not run. Running would have answered the question. We sat through an intrusion that was somehow polite, like a neighbor testing a fence. After a minute, the hand withdrew. The square lightened to its original absence. Lee pressed her forehead to her knees and laughed once, a small bark breaking off into a sob. "Why are we still here?" "Because it wants us where we are," I said, and saying the quiet part turned out to be a relief. "And because we still think we're the kind of people who decide things." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and looked at me with an expression I'd seen only in the second between avalanche and roar. That acceptance which isn't surrender, exactly just a realignment of size. We ate a little, because not eating is another way to answer questions. The food tasted like its labels had been generic, primary color nutrition. The water from our bottles had thickened imperceptibly, just enough to leave a lace on the plastic when we tipped it. The compasses slept. The clicking stopped. For an hour, the world remembered how to be world. Then a voice spoke outside, just one, just above a whisper, and it was mine. "Lee," it said, "open up. It's me." Lee's hand crushed my wrist so hard I felt my pulse in my fingers. We both stared at the door, as if a look could bar it. The voice was not a recording. It breathed at the right places. It hesitated the way I do when I'm not sure a joke will land. It carried the weight of a man who had not slept. "We can't stay here," it said softly. "They're worse at night. Come on, we move." We move now. My throat unlocked it, wanted to answer with the exact tone and cadence the voice would expect. My chest filled with words that fit my mouth like old coins fit old machines. Between my ribs, down where the mountain had been practicing, the thrum shifted a fraction, and in that shift I understood a new rule one I wish I hadn't learned. They improve when you teach them. And your fear is a lesson plan. I leaned close to Lee's ear and whispered, without moving my lips, "If I speak, don't believe me." Outside, my voice sighed. "Please." Lee closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fear had hardened into something heavy and useful. She shook her head. She did not answer. Silence sat down beside us, companionable as a dog that knows you're hurt. Minutes stretched, then snapped. The handle rattled once. The black square dimmed the room. And then, so softly the sound almost apologized for existing. The logbook's radio, no one had said it had a radio, but it did, coughed out a band of static, and amid the hiss, a woman's voice broke like ice on rock. "Evan, if here, turn, not back, between." It died. The compasses woke and spun themselves to angry sleep. Lee's face tilted to mine. Question without words. "Amanda?" I said, and the name was a risk. Names are doors. "No," Lee said. "Listen." Far off, down in the timber, something big moved against a lot of small things. Not like an animal. Like a load of pipes dragging itself toward a job it didn't want. We had to leave the polite box. "Between," I said. "We leave between." We waited until the door's square lightened, until the pressure in our ears eased. Then, with all the ceremony of sneaking out of church, we rose, shouldered, and stepped wide of the threshold so our bodies would not be framed. Outside, dusk had settled into its counterfeit. The figures on the water were gone, or they were tired of being seen. The tags along the cable were still turned toward us, like metal-faced sunflowers, tracking a different sun. We angled away from the floodplain and into ribs of rock that laddered toward a notch. Above the notch, the sky showed a color from childhood, those early mornings when my father rattled the wall and my mother said, "He's home," and I believed in a world where coming home was a verb you could complete. The notch narrowed until we had to turn sideways. The stone here was smooth, smoothed by more than weather-polished by passage. Our packs rasped. The mountain cut a shallow stripe under my cheekbone. The air between the walls thinned and then thickened with the same slow pulse the lake had. Halfway through, the click returned, very faint, inside the stone itself. It tapped my back teeth like a reluctant dentist. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap. I didn't answer. Between is not only a place. It's an appetite that has learned table manners. The notch spat us onto a ledge barely wider than a boot print, and the wind there had teeth. It bit through fabric and made a flute of every loose thread. Beyond the drop, the range lay in layered paper grays over grays, each mountain slightly misprinted, edges not quite aligned, like the world had been run through a tired press. We shuffled sideways, faces to rock. Frost coated the stone, but refused to be cold. It felt room temperature and wrong, like frost painted for a stage. Far below, a stand of firs combed the slope into a dark nap, and something moved upslope through them, without disturbing a single bough, as if it owned a root we couldn't perceive. The tapping followed us in the mineral, patient as dripstone. If fear is a lesson plan, the mountain had graduated. Halfway along, the ledge narrowed to nothing, and then pretended it hadn't. For a blink, a cliff face advanced an inch toward my nose, curious. My chest brushed stone that was not there a heartbeat before. Lee hissed through teeth, the sound riding the wind like a thrown knife. "Don't stop," she said, which is another way of saying don't think. We made the turn, and the ledge widened into a pocket cut from the cliff by some giant's thumb. In the pocket, wind died with an audible click, as if a fader slid down. My ears rang in the sudden quiet. A shape occupied the pocket that shouldn't fit in a pocket. An A-frame of old timbers braced against the rock, a relic of some mining daydream abandoned after the first winter. A bell hung from the ridgepole on a rotted strap. The clapper was a knot of braided wire, and the wire was braided from something that had once been paracord and something that remembered being hair. A sign leaned in snow, half buried. The paint had flaked to the ghost of letters. Up close I could make them with my fingers. If you must signal, signal between. That word again. Between had grown from suggestion to jurisdiction. Lee's eyes tracked the bell. Mine tracked the strap. Neither of us touched it. We eased past, and the cliff took us into a narrow chimney that dropped between ribs of granite like a throat. The air smelled of old fires and wet iron. Halfway down, the chimney kinked, and for one step gravity forgot how to behave. My boot lifted, and my body, confused, lifted too, as if up and down had shaken hands and swapped coats. I put my hands out and felt nothing, and then the rough rush of rock as reality remembered itself. We landed folded into each other and laughed once, the ragged laugh of people who nearly lost their shapes. We came out into a small basin, a cupped palm of a place with a frozen tarn at its center, not our tarn. This one held perfectly still, as if in a long exposure, snowflakes caught half an inch above the surface and refusing to choose a side. The ice beneath was flawlessly clear, and through it lay a scatter of objects arranged with a collector's care. A brass compass, a knitted mitten the color of an old bruise, a Polaroid face down, a coil of wire, a bell clapper, a lunchbox with blue stars, a patch-stitched WR. They'd been laid in a circle around something I could not see, but felt the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue in absence that organizes everything near it. Lee stopped. "You seeing this?" "I'm seeing it," I said, though seeing wasn't the right verb. The items gave off a quiet like sleeping animals. Above the tarn, a faint wheel of frost crystals rotated, each tiny hexagon turning at its own speed, and all of them together making a slow, patient clock. On the far shore, a shape rose from behind a boulder and resolved not into a person, but into the memory of one. It was an outline made of the world behind it, fir bark and sky, rock and snow seen through a human-shaped window. When it moved, the view through it slid fractionally too fast, like a panorama misaligned with the frame. It raised a hand. The hand did not occlude anything. The background continued, parallax wrong. "Do not agree with yourself," I whispered, and made my breath fall out of step from its step. The outline tilted. Then, with a generosity that felt almost insulting, it pointed not at us, but at the circle under the ice. More precisely, at the center of the circle where nothing sat. "It wants us to complete it," Lee said. "Or undo it," I said, "or teach it the last piece it needs. Which is worse?" She asked. "Teaching," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I liked. We circled the tarn, keeping a polite distance from the hovering snow. The outline tracked us with that too precise slip, like it was wearing a suit from a fabric the world couldn't quite drape. When we reached the nearest point, I crouched and put a gloved finger to the ice. Cold didn't bite. The sensation was like touching a window in a dream cool by decree, not by physics. The objects beneath wavered, then clarified. The lunchbox's latch twitched, almost a flinch. "Heaven," Lee said, voice low. Look. My reflection in the ice looked back, but not synchronized. It blinked a beat late. It mouthed a word I was not mouthing. The letters formed slowly, fogging the underside of the ice. HOME, a pressure built in my sinuses, sharp as altitude sickness, sweet as nostalgia. The bell behind us stirred on its strap. The braided clapper kissed metal without sound. The outline across the tarn nodded once, the way a good teacher nods when a student finally grasps the trick. We stepped back in concert. The hovering snow settled in an instant, like a decision. Tiny impacts ticked against the ice. The circle of objects sighed a collective inch inward, as if elastic released, as if something between them had relaxed. "Leave it," I said. Lee's mouth set in that stubborn line that once talked a helicopter pilot into flying in weather he called a career ender. "We can't leave it as is," she said. "This is a lock or a prayer. Or both. Locks keep things in or out," I said. "Prayers invite. Maybe it's both," she said. "Maybe everything up here is both." We were arguing about metaphors on a mountain that ate the difference between nouns and verbs. The outline watched, pleased at the lesson. A gust combed the basin. It rattled tags we couldn't see. It rolled the sound of my name around the rim and sent it back with the vowels dented. Evan became event without T. The black dust lacing the snow drew faint lines as if a draftsperson had put a square against the world and made marks. Downslope, beyond the basin, the timberline bent in a way timber doesn't bend, and a road appeared where no road had been. Two pale ruts leading into a stand of trees that pretended not to exist a moment earlier. A sign leaned at the entrance, the paint fresh. Ranger access no public entry. On a newer board below, Amanda Belmont authorized. Lee froze. Amanda. A noise lifted out of her like air leaving a punctured lung. She looked smaller and more dangerous at once. The road did not belong. It belonged the way a forgery belongs to, correct? Too eager to be believed. But the name hit her bloodstream and wrote it. "We don't follow the kind path," I said, and hated that I had to say it. "We follow the true one." She nodded once, a savage nod, eyes wet and bright. "Then we make a new path." We cut away from the ruts and climbed toward a shoulder where the rock broke into steps. The outline did not follow, or it followed by staying put and letting the world move. The tapping in the stone smiled, if tapping can smile. On the shoulder, the wind returned with interest. It brought a smell from summers ago, warm resin, hot dust, sap blisters popping under a noon sun. The smell made me 17 and invincible for a heartbeat. The mountain used that heartbeat to move a boulder a foot to the left without moving it. My boot found air where the step had been. I pitched and caught the edge with fingertips that burned with old scars. The world stuttered a frame to let me decide if I was the kind of man who fell there. I chose no. It accepted my choice with visible reluctance. We topped out on a narrow spine that ran toward a higher knuckle. On the spine, objects had been laid at regular intervals, neat as mile markers. A mitten, a Polaroid, a bell clapper, a coil of wire, a compass, a lunchbox. Each was paired with its shadow, and each shadow lagged. The lag was longer now, a full second, like the mountain was tired of pretending time was a single rope. At the far end, on a flat of stone, someone had chalked a circle and written, in a hand I recognized as my own, though I had not written it yet. "If you meet yourself, do not discuss the past. IT will make more of you." Lee read it without humor. "That's new," she said. "It's old," I said. "And we're late." We stood in the circle, because sometimes you argue with a posted rule by obeying it. The air inside was fractionally warmer. My breath unfroze into something that tasted like childhood kitchens. Far downslope, a shape detached itself from the timber's shade and climbed wrong, like a video played backward. Behind us, the bell we didn't touch rang once, thin and far and impossibly near, the note both above hearing and intimately in the ear. A man stepped onto the stone opposite us, careful, cautious, scanning for hazard with the same habit of eye I use. He wore my jacket scuffed in the same places, a tear on the cuff from the same rusty nail outside the gear shed. He looked at me with a grief I recognized, because it too was mine. Lee swayed and didn't fall. He lifted 2 fingers in greeting, and like a person forced to speak a language he once knew and now picked up as he went, said, "Don't ask me anything." The rules were not suggestions. They were the only bridges available over a fault that wanted to open under us. I nodded, a tiny motion that did not teach anything it didn't already know. Behind my double, the timberline folded the way a book does, and a sliver of color showed through, that old color from behind the crease. He winced, as if light hurt a place inside his head. He took a step forward, and the shadows of the objects on the spine miscounted, 1 extra shadow where there had been none. Lee's voice came out raw. "Did you find her?" It wasn't a question to him. It was a question to the version of me who might carry an answer that would end the ache. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the answer was there, and it didn't belong to words. It belonged to the way his mouth refused to open. It belonged to the slight tilt of his head toward the place where between thickened like syrup. It belonged to the fact that he did not step into the circle. I understood then, with the clarity cool places give. He had not found Amanda. He had found what she had found, and he had learned the cost of name and answer. "Between," he said softly. "Knock between." He lowered his hand and made the pattern on his thigh. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. The mountain listened. The stone under my boots responded, almost imperceptibly, with a counter-rhythm, the way a mother hums against a child's cry until the 2 sounds become one. "Show us," Lee said, and I wanted to put a hand over her mouth and didn't. The mountain does not need your yes. It hears your want. He pointed to the ridge beyond the knuckle, where the rock formed a natural arch. Under the arch, air was a different density, visible the way heat is visible. The arch's shadow split into 2, and the second shadow went the wrong direction and pooled against an uphill stone. "When?" I asked, because that was the one question that did not multiply the world. He smiled a miserable little smile that belonged to my face. "Already," he said. And not yet. Behind him, the outline waited, patient, pleased that the students had learned to ask better questions. The bell rang once more, not with the clapper, but with the wire remembering it had once been hair. We stepped off the circle and toward the arch, because even men who know the sign says nitrogen monoxide entry will go where the door is when something in the house calls them by their full name. Under the arch, the air changed temperature without changing warmth. It grew precise. My breath left my mouth and seemed to stack in thin pains, each exhale filing behind the last like glass slides labeled with dates I hadn't lived yet. Lee went first, because she trusts her balance more than mine, and because she knows if she hesitates the mountain will rewrite the hesitation into a door. On the other side, the world had been cleaned. Not made new cleaned. Edges were honest. Colors told the truth they were designed to tell. The sky wore that old color again, the one memory keeps to itself and only lends when you need to recognize where you're going. Even the wind had a direction you could name without instruments. For 3 whole breaths, I believed we had stepped out. Then the bell rang once behind us, and its echo did not return. It went forward, deeper, and came back as a shadow. Ahead lay a slope of low juniper and broken stone, and in the stone, prints, bare, deep, not human, and exactly human. Each print held a residue like frost reverse-engineered from breath. Between 2 boulders, someone had hammered pitons in a neat ladder, and the rope threaded through them showed no wear, only the idea of wear, like a costume designed by someone who had studied photos of fatigue but never touched a frayed thing. Your double? Lee asked, meaning, did he go this way? All our doubles, I said, because the pitons were placed by a hand with my reach and her caution, an intersection of habit that belonged to both of us and many versions we had not met. We climbed the ladder because the mountain had provided a route, and pretending we weren't grateful would have taught it a lie about us. The rope's fibers vibrated against my gloves, with a hum pitched right at the place where human hearing fails. My skull felt it like a tuning fork. At the top, the ground leveled into a narrow terrace with a view that pushed the horizon so far back I could imagine a country not shaped by our names. On the terrace, a single chair faced the drop. Metal, folding, the kind you find in church basements and VFW halls. A sweater lay over its back, blue-gray, pilled, with one cuff unraveled into a curl no one had trimmed. On the seat, a tape recorder, the old kind with the big clack button. A loop of cassette ribbon had unspooled and lay in the dust like a black vein. Someone had written on the casing with a pink pen, "Between learner." Lee set a hand on my arm. "Don't press play." The wind paused to listen. I pressed play. Silence first, and then a sound like snow falling on fur. Soft, full of detail you can't catch until you're much closer than you should be. Then a voice, quiet, female, careful with consonants as if they might break. "If you hear this, you thought you were the kind of person who doesn't press play," she said. "You were wrong in a way that kept you alive." Good. Lee went very still. Amanda had a way of flattening her vowels when she concentrated. A Kansas schoolteacher hiding in a Colorado climber. This voice had that. It also had something extra in echo that didn't belong to air. "I am where the rules were written, or where they noticed themselves," the voice continued. "It doesn't matter. The mountain is not a mountain. It is a habit. It repeats unless you surprise it. Don't give it what it expects, even when what it expects is your refusal." The tape clicked softly, a splice passing the head. In the gap, a faint tapping threaded through, patient and pleased. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap. Amanda spoke again, lower. "It will use you against you. When you hear yourself, that's trespass. When you see yourself, that's invitation. When you feel yourself, when your body gives you back your own touch, that's contract. Don't sign unless you mean to stay." Lee's breath snagged and then found its way out. She didn't cry. She made a sound that was quieter and older. The tape warbled. "I left markers," Amanda said. "They move. Sometimes you have to let them move. If you try to fix them in place, they fix you instead. Go to the lake that isn't. Get in without getting wet. Not between. Not on. Not under. Between. It will answer if you bring the right silence." The recorder clicked to a stop. The ribbon trembled as if something had exhaled across it. In the pause, the mountain offered us a kindness. A brief, perfect ignorance of consequence. The kind you get in the second before you choose the worst road for a good reason. Lee slipped the sweater over her shoulders. It fit like it had been waiting for her measurements to arrive. "The lake that isn't," she said. "We've seen two." Neither was. "Then it's the third," I said, "because patterns are traps and also tools." We moved along the terrace, past the chair, past a stack of stones that rearranged themselves into the same stack we had passed 3 minutes before. The air grew thinner and richer, a contradiction that made my heart kick like a mule. A storm lived somewhere above the horizon, locked behind glass, flashing without thunder. The smell of wet copper deepened until it became taste, and the taste turned into memory, the kind you don't have until a smell creates it. I remembered a room I'd never stood in, a desk I'd never leaned on, a photograph I'd never taken of a woman who looked like Amanda but older, smiling with the knowledge of a choice no one applauded. We found the lake beyond a stand of aspen, whose leaves refused to choose a side green and gold at once, trembling in wind that didn't touch us. The basin around it was dry, a bowl of cracked clay and obsidian shards. At the center lay a perfect oval of darker air, not water, not shadow. An absence with a surface matte as velvet, rippling very slowly with a breeze that didn't exist. Lee crouched at the rim. Her hair drifted toward the oval the way hair drifts toward static. "How do you get in without getting wet?" she asked, and the question was a lesson the mountain could learn from. "Ask something you did ask," I said, correcting the rule before the place could correct us. She smiled without looking up. "How do you knock between?" she asked instead. I took off my glove. The cold didn't bite. The air around the oval smelled like old pennies and snow in a freezer. I spread my fingers and held my hand above the absence. Then, with two knuckles, I tapped not the clay, not the air above, but the edge where the two argued. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap. The oval tensed. A ripple moved across it like a thought moving under skin. The aspen leaves stilled all at once. In the hush, something answered from below. Not the same rhythm. A different one. Tap, tap, pause. Tap. It asked a question. The shape of the question made my eyes water. "Don't answer," Lee breathed. "I won't," I said, and meant it the way a man means it when he has already started to break his word. The oval lifted an inch, then softened. It did not wet my fingertips. It was not liquid. It was a boundary the way midnight is a boundary. I pressed. The surface stretched, then yielded, and my hand slid an elbow, deep through nothing that felt like everything cool and warm, thick and thin, a catalog of opposites organized into a single decision. My skin lit up with pins of memory, my father's wall knock, my mother's coffee spoon, the rattle of rain on a tent I hadn't owned yet. When my fingers found purchase, it was not on a thing, but between things, a wedge of space just wide enough to hook. I knocked there. The basin exhaled. The oval inverted like a coin flipping in slow motion, and then there was water, real and bright and bitter cold, slapping my wrist, surging up, filling the bowl in a single impossible swing from absence to flood. The aspen leaves spun like coins too, each leaf becoming a green face and a gold face, and then a new color, not named by anyone who needed to sleep afterward. In the rising water, shapes turned human and almost held just under the skin of the lake, moving the way people move when they're speaking underwater and hope to be understood. A face pressed near my hand, a woman's, hair like drowned moss, eyes too calm, mouth closed to keep a promise. Not Amanda. Not anyone I knew. Someone missing from a year I hadn't thought about in 2 decades. She looked at me with the patient courtesy of a librarian. Behind her, more figures arranged themselves in gentle ranks, like a congregation waiting for the hymn. The tapping returned, now in the water itself, stinging my bones. Tap, tap, pause, tap, ask, ask. I pulled my hand free, and the water resisted like a child who's not done playing. It let me go. The surface steadied. The faces drifted back, not sad, not angry adjusting, the way tide adjusts to rock. Lee's voice had gone small. "What did you do?" "Knocked between," I said, and that was true and not useful. The far shore of the Knot Lake rippled and opened along a seam that had not existed. A dark hallway of trees presented itself, straight as a surveyor's joke. The tags from earlier had been strung along its mouth, chiming though the air held still. On one, new letters had been scratched, fresh and sharp. "If you enter, enter with less than you brought." Lee glanced at me and at her pack. "We jettison weight," she said. "Not gear," I said. "Ourselves." She nodded like she'd expected that answer and hated how right it felt. "What do we leave?" "Agreement," I said, surprising myself with the ease of it. "We stop being a single version of us. We become two people who disagree on small things and big ones, and never teach the mountain which argument wins." Lee smiled, pained and real. We can do that. We stood at the mouth of the trees and practiced descent like a warm-up, the way singers hum scales. We argued about whether the sweater was blue or gray, about whether the tape recorder's pink pen was white or bone, about whether the bell had rung twice or once. We disagreed about the smell of copper, if it was pennies or blood, or the inside of a pocket full of keys. None of it mattered, and all of it did. The air took our voices and didn't file them. Something in the trees seemed to relax, and the straight corridor bent a degree, which felt like permission. We entered. The path underfoot was made of needles that made no sound and stones that remembered footsteps from other days. Between the trunks, the world smeared a little, like an oil painting touched too soon. At intervals, rules had been carved into plaques and nailed to trees with no nails. Do not walk in step with your fear. Do not teach it your name. Leave enough to return. Some plaques had been removed, the outline of their absence darker, as if the omission itself were ink. Halfway down the corridor, the tapping started from ahead and behind at once, insisting on a dialogue. A voice threaded through it, that perfect imitation of mine grown closer to perfect, sanded of error. "Lee," it said with a care that opened old doors. "I found her." Lee's shoulders twitched the smallest amount. She did not answer. The tags overhead clicked in approval like a classroom full of patient metronomes. We came to a clearing so symmetric it betrayed itself. At its center stood a fire ring of stones that had never known fire. Above it hung a kettle from a tripod, and the steam rising from the spout curled downward in a question mark, and then reversed course and crawled back in like a snake returning to burrow. Around the ring, 3 camp chairs faced inward. 2 were empty. In the third sat Amanda, alive, or arranged like life. She wore the same blue-gray sweater Lee carried now. Her hair was tied back with a red elastic that had lost its snap. She looked older than the last photo we had, the fine lines around her eyes etched by choices made without witnesses. Her hands rested on her knees, palms up, the old injury on her left ring finger whiter than the rest. She smiled when she saw us, not with relief, but with recognition, which is a different kindness. "Don't come closer," she said, and the words fit the air like they'd been waiting for our mouths to arrive and catch them. Lee stopped 2 paces from the invisible circle I could feel against my shins. "Amanda," she said, and her voice broke on the last syllable into all the versions of that name she'd ever said. Amanda's eyes flicked to the tags above and then back. "You made it to between," she said. "Good. Not many do." "Fewer leave." "We're leaving," Lee said. It sounded like a fact you hammer into a wall with both hands. Amanda's smile didn't change. "I did too," she said gently. "And then I learned that leaving is a shape like any other in here. You can wear it and still be inside." The tapping in the trees slowed, as if giving space for grief to move its furniture. "What is it?" I asked, because naming makes bridges, even when bridges are traps. Amanda cocked her head. "It's not a thing," she said. "It's what things do when we're not looking. It's the default state, the between state. Out there, you can ignore it because you have errands. In here, it has errands." Lee's mouth tightened. "Come with us." "I can't step past the circle," Amanda said, and lifted her palm a millimeter. The air tugged her skin like static. "I taught too much. It learned me back. My edges belong to this geometry now." Behind her, in the not steam, a figure tried the shape of her head, failed and corrected, each failure closer to her profile. The tags overhead whispered metal secrets. The rules on the trees darkened, as if rewritten from inside the wood. "What do we do?" Lee asked. "Tell me the one true thing." Amanda's expression changed, not into pity, but into a memory of pity. "You already know it," she said. "You've been practicing since the first footprint." Lee's hand found mine and squeezed twice, then once, our shorthand. Her eyes were bright and furious and full of love. she refused to weaponize. "We don't teach it," she said. "We surprise it." Amanda nodded. "Leave something it wants and doesn't understand. Leave a silence it can't categorize. Then walk where it expects you to fall." Behind us, the path we'd come down darkened the way wet darkens cloth. Ahead, beyond the clearing, the forest creased in that same impossible way, the page folding back to reveal the old color. The arch we'd passed lay visible through trees that had no right to let us see it. "Which way?" I asked. Amanda looked at the kettle, at the steam snake swallowing itself. "The wrong way," she said. Quickly, we turned left when left felt like a misprint. The forest protested courteously. The tags stayed silent. The ground rose when it should have fallen and fell when it should have risen. I gave the mountain a version of my gait it had not rehearsed in years a limp. I'd corrected with stubbornness at 25 and watched the world hesitate while it recalibrated the rhythm. Lee hummed a song she hates off-key on purpose. We walked where falling wanted us and did not fall. Behind us, the polite clearing unmade itself with a sound like paper torn under water. Ahead, the old color broadened until the air wore it without shame. We did not look back when Amanda said our names, the way a home says the names of people who have left. We didn't look back, which is to say we looked back with every step and refused to let our eyes admit it. The forest thinned to ribs of rock, and the sky wore that old, impossible color like a bruise healing backward. Gravity felt honest again for 100 paces, then negotiated a different rate. We angled toward a ridge that should have taken us down to a familiar drainage. A map in my head assembled its old roads, its fire scars, its gullies named only by men who carried them. The mountain listened and rearranged politely. Where there should have been deadfall, there was pavement. Where there should have been creek, there was glass, not literal. The texture of it, the way sound sheared at the edges. Lee's hand brushed mine, a metronome refusing the beat offered. "Talk to me," she said, and meant, "Keep me inside the body that's walking." "Okay," I said, counting the plain things that make a life. "We'll bivy on southern exposure if we can. We'll eat hard calories. We'll sleep in shifts. We won't say our names, not even to each other." "Good," she said, and then, smaller, "Say mine once." Quiet. I didn't. Love that answers when called is a luxury for different altitudes. We reached a shoulder of stone that broke into steps, and on the second step someone had chalked a box, the child's kind from hopscotch. Inside it, in tidy print, a rule we hadn't seen. Do not return by different means. The chalk was fresh. The grit smudged against my boot. A second line had been added in a different hand, shaky but careful. Unless the same means are gone. "Options," Lee said. "Options," I agreed, because hope without contingencies is just surrender in nicer clothes. From the slope below, a new sound rose, a chorus of our own strides, arriving a half-second late. I knew it before I admitted it. The mountain had decided we were useful mirrors. At the edge of my vision, a second pair of us angled along a twin ridge, precise and not precise, a grammar exercise in flesh. I didn't turn. Turning is a question. Questions are doors. We moved faster, not running, exactly adding errors to our gait on purpose. I shortened my step. Lee lengthened hers. I let my right foot roll and caught it. She braved on an odd count. The sound behind us faltered, corrected, faltered again. The tags overhead, there were always tags overhead, whether we saw them or not, twitched with tiny encouragements. The ridge narrowed to a spine the width of a thought, then widened onto a table of wind-scoured granite. In the center lay a ring of black dust. Inside the ring, objects had been arranged like the ones under the ice. A compass, a coil of wire, a bell clapper, a Polaroid face down, a lunchbox with stars. But each object was made wrong on purpose compass needle fixed with a bent pin, wire tied in knots that contradicted themselves, clapper carved from pumice, Polaroid with no chemistry in it, lunchbox painted to look chipped. A practice altar. Lee sank into a crouch. It's copying, she said. But it doesn't know which details matter. That's where we live, I said, tasting the bitter metal of the truth. Between the details that matter and the ones that don't. A breeze scraped the table. The black dust curled as if trying to climb itself. The counterfeit clapper lifted and tapped the counterfeit bell that wasn't there. The sound that followed was perfect. The mountain had improved. Lee flicked her eyes to mine. It's learning faster. Then we have to do something it can't learn, I said, and immediately hated how arrogant it sounded in a place like this. What's that? She asked. Lose on purpose, I said, because nothing hates waste like a system built on repetition. We stepped into the dust ring and ruined the arrangement. Not carefully, not artistically, like toddlers. I kicked the wire into the lunchbox. Lee scraped the compass off the rock with her boot. We scuffed the Polaroid over the dust until it wore a new face. A dark blur shaped like a man with his head turned away. The breeze hiccuped. The tags went expressionless. For a second, the mountain didn't know who we were. We left while its attention adjusted, descending a rib of rock that pretended to be a stair. The world below softened into a basin where sound went to braid itself and come back with new manners. At the basin's center, another lake that wasn't. Not oval this time, but keyhole-shaped, the narrow throat pointing north. The water was water, bright, honest, cold. Under it, not faces now, but letters. Not English, not any alphabet I knew. The shapes of permission. The mouth of the keyhole breathed in and out slowly, the tide of a machine that had learned to imitate lungs. Lee knelt at the throat, hands on her thighs the way people kneel at a grave they want to believe is empty. If we go in now, we don't come out, she said. The sentence didn't sound like fear. It sounded like weather. We go around, I said. Find the back of it. We skirted the shore where shore behaved, then climbed onto a bank where the mud shone with a sheen like oil and didn't mark our boots. The far side of the keyhole opened into a channel cut between boulders. At its end, something like a gate had been installed without a gate being there. 2 uprights of air, lintel of pressure, threshold of sound. Between the uprights, the world warped a degree and showed, briefly, the ranger station 3 days old and 50 years gone. A logbook opened to the page that wrote itself. A chair with a sweater. A hand I knew knocking between. The gate flickered. We waited. When it steadied into the version of the world that didn't eat its own edges, we stepped through together, shoulders touching. The pressure brushed our cheeks like a parent checking for fever. The smell of wet copper surged and receded. The tags overhead chimed a third and a flat. The ground under our boots remembered being dirt. We were not out. Out is a myth you tell yourself, so you'll keep walking. But we were somewhere adjacent to where we had been. The sky had lost the old color and taken on the ordinary courage of afternoon. The wind had smaller ambitions. A blue jay scolded us like we'd missed an appointment. Far down the slope, a line cut through timber resolved into a real dirt road. Ruts honest, culverts clogged with real leaves. And there, swung half open on chains, stood a gate with a hand-painted board, Ranger access no public entry. On a smaller plate below, fresher, Amanda Belmont, authorized. Lee laughed, a cracked glass sound that still held water. It likes that sign, she said. It likes authority, I said. It likes permission. It likes to be asked. A figure stood by the open gate, one hand on the chain. Not mine, not the outline. A ranger in a faded green shirt, collar sun-bleached, face leathered the way faces get when weather keeps them honest. No nameplate, no radio. He raised a hand in greeting and didn't wave like a mirror. He waved like a man. "You folks all right?" he asked, voice carrying without trying. Lee didn't answer. Neither did I. We stood very still and let the world test its weight against our skins. "You're a little far in," he said. "This road's not for the public." "We're not the public," Lee said, and it came out something between a plea and a proof. The ranger's eyes flicked to the sign that agreed. He nodded, slow, as if sign and sentence were a kind of paperwork he'd been waiting to process. "Good," he said. "Then you know the rules." "What rules?" I asked. He smiled like a man buying time from a truth that charges interest. "The ones that keep the number of you the same on both sides of the line," he said. A jay screamed. The tags overhead, the real ones, aluminum cut from beer cans, twitched in a wind that did not smell like pennies. The road had potholes the size of old decisions. My calves shook with fatigue that had nothing to do with metaphysics. Lee lowered her pack and straightened. "We need a station," she said. "A phone, a pen, a map that maps." The ranger nodded at each item like checking boxes. "You'll get some and not others," he said. "Come on." He turned up the road without looking back to see if we followed. We did, because following is a kind of test too, and every test up here measures more than what it claims to measure. The trees closed over us, with a sound like paper sliding into a manila envelope. The road climbed gently, as if it had been graded by an old man with a shovel and time to think. Squirrels made decisions. The air agreed to be air. "Why the sign?" I asked his back. "Why her name?" "Because she asked," he said simply. "Asking leaves a shape. Sometimes the mountain keeps the shape because it likes how it fits." "Where is she?" Lee asked, keeping her voice between question and demand. He didn't answer for a while, as if the road were a sentence, and he owed the grammar respect. "Here," he said finally, "and not here. Same as the rest of us who signed too much." "You signed?" I asked before I could stop myself. He lifted one shoulder. "We all sign, some with ink, some with feet, some with fear. The trick is leaving room next to your name. So if the mountain writes back, it can't crowd you off the line." We rounded a curve and the station appeared where stations appear, surprised to be seen. A low building, cinder block and wood, a radio mast leaning at the angle of persistence. The porch held a bench with initials carved by knives that had done other work. A coffee can sat with the requisite layer of dead flies on its surface, honest in its neglect. Inside, through the open door, the light held dust and maps and the notion of rescue. Lee stopped on the porch, hand on the jamb. "If we go in," she said. "We're in. We're already in," I said. "Different roof." The ranger held the door wider, an old courtesy. "If you must knock," he said, smiling without humor, "knock between." Lee stepped over the threshold without touching it. I followed, pausing with my palm an inch from the frame, knocking there, in air, twice, then once. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The building noticed. The floorboards took our weight and did not ask for more. The radio on the desk hissed like a cat that had learned better manners. A logbook lay open to a page that had been waiting for our arrival longer than we had been alive. The pen beside it had chewed marks. The map on the wall showed the range and left the names off like a favor. On the first blank line in my own hand, I wrote, "Nove 2 returned 2, left none." And then, because the mountain hates a boast and loves an accurate count, I added, "For now." Lee set her fingers on the edge of the book and didn't turn the page. "We're not done," she said. "We're not," I agreed. "But we're numbered." Outside, the wind picked up and dropped. The tags along the eaves chimed once, a single honest note. Somewhere deeper, a bell rang with a wire that remembered being hair. The ranger poured coffee so black it wanted to be night. He handed us tin cups dented by mouths that belonged to other days. "You'll want to go back," he said conversationally. "Everyone does." You'll tell yourself it's for answers. It never is. What is it for? Lee asked. He watched the steam go somewhere it didn't belong and return as itself. Company, he said. We don't like to think the thing that listens is the only thing listening. I sipped and burned my tongue. The pain was ordinary and perfect. It lived in my mouth and didn't echo. Lee blew across her cup and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked at me with that field triage clarity that has saved more lives than heroics ever will. We go once more, she said. We don't stay. We don't teach. We carry a silence it can't categorize. What silence is that? I asked, for the first time feeling the weight of one true thing. We might already be spending something we couldn't replace. She set the cup down. Forgiveness, she said simply. Not the kind you give to be brave. The kind you give because you're tired of being right. The ranger's mouth tilted. That's a new one, he said softly, as if making a note to keep it ready for the next set of boots. We finished the coffee. The radio hissed. The map refused to name what would kill you. The door remembered we'd knocked where there was nothing to knock on. And somewhere between here and the old color, a woman we loved sat in a chair and held her hands palms up and waited for us to surprise a habit older than roads. Morning in the station pretended to be ordinary. Light came through dirty glass and long bars that found dust and made saints of it. The coffee had the same scorch it always has in places where men try to stay awake by boiling their tools. A mouse had learned the edges and obeyed them. The mountain let us rehearse being human and watched what we emphasized. We packed like people who might come back. That lie weighed less than hope. The ranger handed over a map that would not name what mattered and a pen that had finally stopped being chewed. He did not offer a radio. If you bring a voice, he said mildly, it will bring a better one. Lee slid the blue-gray sweater into her pack and then, after a second, took it back out and put it on. The fabric had Amanda's habit of warmth. We go wrong fast, she said. No pauses where it expects a pause. Forgiveness, I said, not as a strategy, but as a thing you place on a table between friends, so no one has to hold it alone. We stepped off the porch and didn't touch the threshold. The road down looked honest for 50 yards and then became a list of suggestions. We turned away from it, deliberately impolite. The trees tightened and then, surprisingly, gave us room. Between two trunks, someone had nailed a plaque that had never known a nail. Do not tidy your passage. Be remembered in scraps. So we were messy. We knocked snow from branches where we didn't need to. We scraped our boots against stones that hadn't asked. We left scuffed grammar. The tags above us, honest aluminum, rattled in a wind that had not read our syllabus. We reached the bench with the ring of furs, the cairn, the lunchbox with stars. The box still waited, latch bent, paint chipped in the exact places memory told it to chip. My hand wanted that latch like thirst wants a hose. I put the want down gently and spoke into it like a dog you mean to keep. Not today. Lee touched the lunchbox with 2 fingers and made a blessing shape she does on helicopters, an old ritual for machines that carry people over their luck. Forgive me, she said to it, to herself, to whatever it watched her want. The air loosened the notch. We moved toward the arch we knew would appear where arches prefer to appear. On the way, the mountain tried smaller kindnesses, a coin I had lost years ago showing up in the path, a voice around a bend that would have been my mother's if she'd taken up hiking, the smell of my father's aftershave hiding in juniper. We let the gifts pass through us like rain through hair, not refusing, not accepting, letting. At the arch, the old color lived in the shadow like a promise intends to. The bell on the ridgepole, the braided clapper, the strap, the sign about signaling between, they were all there, artifacts arranged for lesson and longing. I raised my hand to the air where stone decided to be stone and knocked between. Tap, Tap, pause, tap. The air noticed. The arch widened by a sentence. We went under, and the world grew precise again. Edges confessed their edges. The wind took a side. On the terrace, the folding chair had turned to face a slightly different horizon, as if it had changed its mind and didn't want to make a scene. The tape recorder waited, ribbon retucked, button ready to clack. We didn't press it. We already carried the voice we needed to hear. Lee pointed with her chin toward the basin, where the knot lake had been a mouth an hour and a lifetime ago. The bowl lay dry, cracked clay glowing with that velvet absence. And then, as we watched, water rose from nowhere and became a mirror, then a page, then a door. Faces gathered under it, the way fish do when children lean over a dock. Amanda was not among them. A truth can be kind if you let it be. We don't ask, Lee said. We show. I stepped to the rim and unshouldered my pack. Inside, wrapped in a wool hat, lived a small altar I hadn't admitted to myself I'd built. An old carabiner with bent gait. A paper wristband from a hospital of a decade ago. A chapel key I'd kept after a funeral, because men keep keys to rooms that don't belong to them. And the Polaroid from the shack, still face down and heavy with itself. I took the wristband. It had my name on it and wrongness all through it. I pinched the paper until the adhesive gave and the loop opened and the circle it made died. I held the strip above the water and spoke in a voice the mountain had not heard from me yet. Soft, ordinary. The voice I used to apologize to a stranger in a grocery aisle I'd blocked with my cart. Forgive me, I said, to a system that wanted me to be spectacular. For the things I broke, learning to be right. The faces under the water did not change. The tapping in the clay did, just enough. Tap, tap, no pause. A third beat that didn't belong. A laugh, maybe. A child slapping the table because rhythm felt good. Lee took off the sweater. She folded it along its inside-out ghost and set it on the clay 3 inches from the waterline, where spray would not find it. I knew what it cost her, which is to say I knew the interest that would accrue. I love you, she said, to a sister she could not lift, to a mountain that did not know the word, to herself finally, because we are hardest on what we're built from. And I want you to forgive me for going home without you. The water furrowed, not toward us away. A lane opened. A tongue of air laid down on its surface like a walkway, narrow as a lie and straight as a good intention. It led not through the keyhole we feared, but around it, to a scene in the far bank that no map would ever admit, because maps prefer the confidence of edges. We walked the air between water and water. It took our weight as if we were invited and did not belong. The faces watched, not pleading. That courtesy again, which is what you call indifference when it doesn't hurt you. The tags overhead, which should not have been there and were, kept silent out of respect. At the seam, the world folded with the gentleness of a woman, putting away a dress from a life she didn't live anymore. The corridor of trees returned, straight as an alibi. The rules had been rearranged. Do not leave what you can't name, one said now. Do not take what agrees, said another. The third had a blank, as if waiting for a sentence to learn itself. We entered and argued all the way, on purpose. We disagreed about the direction we would flee if something ran at us from behind, about whether moss knows which side of a tree is north when the mountain forgets the compass, about whether the voice that had spoken from the shack door had said please because it was learning us, or because it had learned mercy. Our disagreement wasn't armor. It was music. The corridor tolerated it. And then, without drama, the clearing arrived. The kettle, the not steam, the 3 chairs. 2 empty, 1 occupied. Amanda sat with her palms up, that white scar on her ring finger brighter than any rule. She looked worse in human terms and better in terms this place used, defined, precise, coherent with the geometry that had claimed her edges. She smiled when she saw us, and that smile made a home in my ribs and refused to trespass. "Again," she said, amused and sad. "You found another way to be wrong in the direction of right." "We brought something it can't file," Lee said, voice steady the way a rope is when tension is shared. "We're leaving it, and we're leaving with you." Amanda glanced at the sweater missing from Lee's shoulders, and then at the place where water had learned a lane. "You brought it something it will spend a long time trying to understand," she said. "That will buy you about 3 minutes." "And stand," I said. She didn't. She looked down at the air around her ankles, the place where a circle had been taught to be a circle. "It's not the circle," she said. "It's me. I've been collected." Lee stepped to the edge, where her skin prickled with a static that wasn't static. "I forgive you," she said abruptly, and the sentence was so out of key that the tags overhead fell completely silent. "For coming here without telling me why. For making me follow your reasons instead of my own. For choosing a habit older than us. I forgive you, not because it's noble, because I'm tired." Amanda's eyes filled, not with tears. Exactly, this place didn't waste water on ritual, but with a light that had nothing to do with old colors. The air at her ankles loosened by a hair's breadth. She stood. It hurt to watch. It hurt the way a limb hurts when blood returns to it. Pain that promises use. I held the space where an argument would have liked to be. "I forgive you," I said to the geometry, and felt stupid, then less so. "For being what you are. For improving when taught. For not knowing how to stop. I forgive you for counting us." The clearing did not bow. The kettle didn't steam backward. But the edge of the circle, where it had been learned, softened a degree and stopped looking like law. Amanda put one foot over it, and the air clutched at her like a host who doesn't want to be offended and doesn't want to be left alone. She lifted the other foot and for a moment hung between staying and going, and in that moment the mountain became interesting to itself in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. "Walk where falling wants you," Lee whispered. Amanda did. She wobbled, caught herself with a laugh that had been missing from this place since the rules noticed they were rules, and came to us. We did not touch her, not because we were afraid of stealing something the mountain needed to keep its shape, but because touch is a contract, and we had changed the terms. We turned left, wrong and fast. The forest bent wrong and led us. The tags dared a chime and thought better. The path narrowed, widened, split, rejoined in a braid of habits unlearning themselves. Behind us, the clearing exhaled a long, careful breath, the way someone does at a party when the people who would have made the night easy choose to leave anyway. At the arch, the air had learned hesitation. It asked a question without forming it. We didn't answer. I knocked between on our way out, because gratitude is a kind of disrespect here. It implies a favor, a ledger. The bell did not ring. The world sharpened, then released. The old color stepped back and let the sky be sky. We did not head straight for the station. Straight lines are a kind of vanity. We took the wrong ridge to get to the right one, a long draw to shorten a later mistake, the path with the worse footing, because the mountain had watched us favor the good. We argued about nothing until our mouths ran dry, and then we were quiet and let the silence we carried do work. At the last shoulder, above the honest road, the ranger waited with a posture that pretended to be casual and failed. He saw 3 of us and didn't let his eyebrows teach the mountain. He just nodded. "Numbered," he said. 3, I said. "None left. For now," Lee added, because the book had taught us where honesty belongs. He grinned, quick and human. "For now is the only math that cancels interest." We crossed the gate without touching it, a family learning a new habit, a machine deciding not to repeat. The sign with Amanda's name didn't change. It didn't need to. Names do what they do, whether rules admire them or not. On the porch, the radio hissed with a smaller appetite. The logbook lay open to the line I had written. waiting for the edit the mountain had earned. I added, returned 3, left none, stayed human. The pen leaked a dot at the end of human, and I let it stand. Imperfection had saved us more than once. Amanda sat in the doorway and looked at her hands as if they might not be hers and might be better. She flexed her left ring finger, the white scar bright as a rule and then not. Coffee? She said, and her voice put the weight where coffee asks for it. Lee laughed, the true kind that gives the air to other people. Please. We drank and burned our tongues and were grateful without teaching anyone how. Outside, wind moved in the trees and didn't learn. Somewhere above, a bell made of something that remembered hair chose not to ring. And down in the basin where faces drifted under a skin of water, something tapped 3 times with no pause at all, and then stopped, surprised at itself, pleased to have been more than habit for a breath. Even now, telling it straight, my mouth wants to decorate the ending with certainty. The mountain cured me of that. Endings here are like ledges in fog. You step where you think the stone should be and accept the bruise when the air disagrees. We stayed in the station long enough to remember how doors make sounds and cups are hot in the exact way you expect. Amanda sat near the threshold, never quite touching it, a student released for the day, but not from the school. Lee traced our route on a blank map with a pen that refused to leak. The ranger watched us not with authority, but with a craftsman's interest in whether the thing he had shaped would keep its shape. Time, he said at last, like a trail boss calling it at a bar. You have it until you use it. After that, it belongs to the place you spent it. We stepped off the porch and didn't say goodbye. Words are contracts. Gratitude here is a signature you don't want floating around with strangers. The air was thin with weather that hadn't committed. Somewhere, a bell remembered it had a job and decided to skip it. We took the unkind road first, the one that promised washouts and kept them. Our boots argued with the ruts. Our packs tugged like toddlers learning new legs. We cut off the road where it wanted to be helpful and let the slope organize us into caution. The mountain listened for our old rhythm and didn't get it. We offered it a shuffle we'd never danced before. At the shoulder above the basin of the keyhole, the world tried a trick it had failed with earlier, the appearance of rescue as paperwork. 2 trucks idled by the ranger gate, paint fresh, stripes official, logos correct down to the font that makes you believe your taxes matter. A man in a county jacket lifted a bullhorn, and my father's voice came out, tuned to the frequency that lives under your ribs. Evan, it said, stand down. You're safe. Lee's hand found mine. We don't teach it that word, she said. Safe. We dropped from the shoulder into timber and let the trucks be useful for someone else in a world that needed them. The mountain adjusted the lesson plan one more time, and then this is the part no one ever believes it let us go. Not because we beat it, not because we solved it, because we bored it. Forgiveness, offered where punishment expects an argument, can be dull in the best way. The last test came small. The trail bent around a blowdown, and there, in the crook of the roots, a Polaroid lay face down, edges curled by weather that had the decency to be ordinary. We didn't touch it. We stopped together and looked at it the way you look at a snake and respectfully do not poke. Then I stepped on it, heel down, not to destroy it, but to end the question of whether we would learn anything from it today. The plastic sighed. The image gritted against rock. I didn't turn around to see if the mountain flinched. At the final gate, the tags chimed once aluminum truth, then hung still. The sign with Amanda's name hadn't changed. It stayed where asking had left it. We crossed the line and felt nothing break, which is as much miracle as anyone needs. The parking lot had gravel that creaked like old men getting up from chairs. Our truck sat where it had sulked under dust for days in one world and hours in another. The keys were where we'd left them, because sometimes the story knows you deserve one simple mercy. We loaded slow. Bodies after fear move like animals after a long winter, careful with joy. Lee tied down the gear twice, and then a third time with a knot she only uses when she intends to live. Amanda stood at the open passenger door and rested her hand on the frame like she needed to talk to the metal about what we were asking of it. "You can come with us," I said, and it sounded like a man asking a weather system to get in. "I can ride," she said. Where I end up is a longer conversation. We drove. The engine made the old noises it has always made. The tires found washboard and delivered it to our teeth. The mountain in the rear view did not grow or shrink with melodrama. It sat with the patience of a profession. Trees slid by in their correct order. A crow flew the same path it had flown the day before we were born. Cell bars woke, dozed, woke. No one spoke for miles. Then Lee reached forward and turned on the radio. Static first, the honest kind, then a song from a year none of us had liked at the time, and all of us love now, because it meant we were on a road with stations at all. Amanda laughed, soft and embarrassed, and sang one line off-key, and the mountain did not take her for it. At the first town, we stopped at a diner with a waitress older than the booths and a pie you could smell under the bleach. The bell over the door rang in straightforward physics. We sat at a table where coffee had been poured for strangers and enemies, and both types had left tips. Our cups steamed. The waitress called us hun without having to practice. The pie came in triangles that solved nothing and fixed enough. Amanda ate like taste mattered. Halfway through, she set her fork down and stared at the silver tines, the way a person stares at a shore they're not ready to land on. "It's still with me," she said, not frightened. Not bragging, noting. Lee took her hand. "We can live with between," she said. "We just can't live in it." Amanda nodded. "It will want to be taught," she said. "Sometimes it will ask nicely. Sometimes it will wear your mother's voice. Sometimes it will wear a rule that sounds like virtue. Then we'll be impolite," I said. "And we'll forgive what needs forgiving faster than it can categorize it." The door's bell rang, and 2 hunters walked in trailing cold, and a story about a buck that had seen them coming and left them embarrassed. The mountain didn't arrive. The mountain was everywhere. That was the lesson. But it didn't need to be invited to lunch. We got back on the road and drove toward a house that remembered us. The sun slid toward an ordinary horizon with the relief of a worker clocking out. On a stretch with good reception, Lee's phone found the world. Messages populated like snow. Offers, warnings, a bill. A photo from a neighbor of our front step wet from rain. A voicemail from a number that wasn't a number, and a transcript that read, garbled, between, thanks. We let it sit. At home, the porch light burned because a cheap timer had outlived the man who installed it. The lock turned with the unshowy consent of metal. Air inside the door smelled like itself. We carried our packs in and didn't put them where they belonged. We left them wrong. We were untidy on purpose. That night, sleep arrived as if nothing had threatened it. Around 3, I woke to a sound that will follow me until I am no longer a place that holds sounds. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap. Not from the wall, not from the floor, not from the door. Between. The house listened. The habit that runs under everything had come to the city to see how we live. I lay on my back and let the knock be a visit, not a summons. "Not tonight," I said into the gap between breath and breath, the way a father speaks through a child's nightmare without turning on the light. "You can watch, you can listen. You can learn nothing new." It stopped. It did not sulk. It adjusted. And in the silence after, I heard something I hadn't expected to hear again. My own breath, uncoerced. Inside that breath, another sound, small, human, domestic. Lee turning in her sleep and finding a comfortable lie. Beside her, Amanda asleep on the fold-out, hand tucked under cheek like a picture from a yearbook, taken in a world where pages turn and do not crease into doors. Morning didn't fix anything. It rarely does. It gave us a timeline and a grocery list. It gave the mountain a chance to lose interest and to fail at that now and then. The rules stayed true enough to keep us from getting clever. The map stayed blank in the useful places. The bell, somewhere, learned a new job. Ring when a habit breaks, not when a person does. Sometimes a voice calls from the doorway and uses my cadence to ask for a thing I'd love to give. We leave it unanswered the way you leave a seed, unwatered when you know it belongs to an invasive vine. Sometimes a Polaroid appears on a windowsill, face down, edges curled by a weather that thinks it knows us. We place a coffee cup on it and balance a spoon across the rim. Every refusal is a blessing said without announcing church. And sometimes, we're not saints sometimes, we step onto the porch at night and look toward the line of hills dark against a thinner dark and say the names of people who didn't come back. We say them plain. We don't ask for anything with them. We're not teaching. We're remembering. The mountain can't file that either, not efficiently. Memory without demand is a kind of silence it can't catalog. It leaves us with it. Once, weeks after, the ranger drove by in a truck older than this decade and tipped 2 fingers from the wheel. We waved as if the road were a neighbor's fence. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. On our porch, Amanda stitched a patch onto a jacket that had belonged to someone who had left it without leaving. She sewed careful, the way you do when you want the scene to outlive the lesson that made it. W.R. She embroidered in a corner so small the mountain would need to humble itself to see it. When we finally went back for a day measured in coffee and light, not clocks, it wasn't to find or to prove. It was to carry more silence the place hadn't learned yet. We left the truck at the gate and closed it behind us without touching the chain. We walked wrong and fast. We knocked between. We did not ask. We forgave. We surprised a habit older than language for 3 breaths and left before it recovered. On the way out, a jay cursed us with a vocabulary that didn't need improvement. The tags along the eaves lifted their aluminum faces to a wind that wanted to be nothing else. The bell did not ring. The old color stayed folded away like a dress waiting for a dance it no longer wanted. If the story needs a moral, it's this. When you go looking for the missing in a place that studies you, bring something it can't use. Carry a silence that isn't a threat. Refuse to be a teacher. Learn how to be untidy. Leave room next to your name. And if a voice at the door sounds like yours and asks for a kindness, remember, you can love what's knocking and still not let it in.